Welcome to Raised on D&D podcast. Each month, Raised on D&D brings you inspirational interviews with tips and strategies to enrich your family's gaming experience. Your host for Raised on D&D has been a game master for 30 years and father to 3 gamers. Here is Nick Cardarelli.
Welcome back, gamers. I'm your host, Nick Cardarelli, and this is Raised on D&D. My next guest is originally from Los Angeles, California, currently residing in Bali, Indonesia. He's an advocate for RPGs in schools programs. He's the author of the forthcoming Teacher Gamer Handbook launching on Indiegogo campaign this month. Please welcome Zachary Reznichek. Hey, Zach.
How you doing? Hey, how you doing,
on the
Nick?
Show.
Thanks for having me.
Excited that you're here because your project is something that's really incredible, and it touches me personally because one of the places where RPGs started for me as a teen was actually in a classroom. So we're going to unpack that more as we go along, but we want to talk about your Teacher Gamer Handbook that's coming out. But before we jump into all of that, we kind of want to get to know you more as a gamer. When you started tabletop role-playing games in Dungeons & Dragons.
Thanks for having me, and great to be here. And my experience with tabletop games actually started not on a tabletop, but on a school blacktop outside of my primary school. I was in 5th grade. It was 1982, so we're talking pretty much when there was a basic, intermediate, and advanced set. I think 2nd edition was about to come out in Dungeons & Dragons, and some kids had the original Isle of module out, and I walked up, and what they were doing looked so strange. They had paper, they had a screen, they had a book, they had the weird dice with, of course, at that point, way back when, you'd fill in the grooves of the dice with crayon, pencils, and they were just so excited. It was like a little frenzy, and I think there were 3 of them. And I said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "We're playing Dungeons and Dragons." This is like 1982, and I was just in 5th grade, so I was kind of just an awkward kid. I had switched schools. I had been having a little bit of struggle in schools itself and trying to figure out my identity, who I was. That was kind of an early thing for me. And they said, "Yeah, jump in." And they just gave me a character sheet. Or I don't even know if they gave me a character sheet, or they just told me what my character was. But I was, a chainmail laden fighter sitting on a boat on the way to an island where there was, prehistoric creatures and monsters that were protecting some treasure. And there was a description of as we were coming into the island, there's these shoals and coral reefs, and it was this turquoise blue water that we were looking down into. It's just all sparkle for me. And I said, yeah, I jump in and I dive down and get it. And then I think he asked me one more time, "Are you sure you want to do that?" And I said, "Yeah." Yeah. And it's like, well, okay. I leave my shield and my helmet or, whatever. And I jump in, and he describes, okay, you go to the bottom and, immediately, you can't see as well as you think you can. And you're scrabbling around and you're trying to find the treasure, but you find it, you manage to locate it. And, you go to lift it, I think I probably said something like, "Okay, I grab it, I push off and come up." And he's like, "Well, it's just too heavy, And then I'm like, "Well, okay, well then, I just grab a bunch of it and I swim with it." And he's like, "Yeah, but you're chainmail, like you're pushing off the water, but it's like the moon, you're just jumping up and going down." And then I started,
No.
Like, "What are you saying?" And I was like, I said, "Well, all right, well, I just take off my armor." And he's like, "Well, it takes minutes to put on and take off." And I said, "Well, I take off what I can, and I'm just jumping, and then I'm looking at the other players." It's like, "Well, and I don't even think at that point we had things like fortitude saves and whatnot. It was just pretty much like, you're trying to get breath, you're trying to take your chainmail off, you're panicking, and you drown and you die."
Oh my goodness. First game, first character.
First game, first character, first 10 minutes. And and then, with tears welling up in my eyes, I was like, that's it, and it was like, yeah, you died. And I was like, oh my God, and then I wanted to save face. So I just turned, and I don't know if I ran away or walked away or whatever, and nobody came to console me, and
Oh
nobody
no,
threw me a rope.
typical fifth graders. They're just like, oh, he jumped in the water with his armor. I guess he's dead.
I think everybody was just shocked by the two other guys watching this. Were just like, whoa, and I don't know if that, in-game, out-game, and metagaming and all that thing. I don't know if I ever turned to them and be like, why don't you guys throw me a rope? Or maybe I did, and maybe they said, we don't have a rope, or, I don't know. I don't remember what it was, but I went away crying. I don't think I really expressed it to my parents. Again, I don't remember, but I do remember I totally cried myself to sleep.
Aww.
And I went back, and I sort of, came up on them playing again, and they're like, hey, but they were really friendly. And I was like, hey, and I said, so is that it? Like, I lost the game? And like, no, you didn't lose the game. You just died. And I was like, what do you mean? I said, I said, so can I play? And they're like, yeah, here, take another character. And that was it. I was in, and that became like a lifelong thing for me. Like, that was my opening to RPG, but somehow that experience just, it just changed me forever. And just made me think about life in such a different way.
And that's incredible that, here they were the next day. They weren't like, oh, there's because we've experienced from like team sports,
Yeah.
oh, he can't throw the ball, don't pick him, but here these fifth grade gamers were like, hey, there he is, there's the guy. And they're like, no, you can jump right back in, and you didn't lose, you just died. And I think that's great, because that just kind of shows the difference between that collaborative storytelling versus a competitive game where you're there isn't any room for growth. You're either awesome or you're out. And but there was that whole, no, you can jump back in, you can try it a different way, you can try it with a different character, and you can grow and you can learn, and that's really, really amazing.
Totally. There was no shaming at all. And in fact, like, if anything, I got some status over the years for being kind of a risk taker. And yeah, I would always question things, try things, do things. I became, of course, way more careful about it, but that's actually what was so beautiful. And that translated into my life, really. It was like, and that's why I think role-playing games was such an influence on me in and out of the game, is that it was a kind of simulator. It's an iterative simulator. So it just makes you think about things before you do them, or, consider the risks, or be a little bit more strategic.
Yeah, and now we're fast forwarding, and you're a father. How many children do you have?
2 boys. We have 1 boy. My older son is 18, Milan, and my younger son, Sivan, is 14.
What age would you say you introduced them to some kind of form of tabletop role-playing games or dungeons?
I mean, they were getting primed from early on, for sure. And I think that playing with them ever since the early days of, just sticks and rocks representing something, to, what became Legos and other kinds of things. But I also had minifigs around, so they were playing with my minifigs and using terrains and whatnot. When did they actually start rolling dice and creating characters? Was probably more along the age, I don't know, probably somewhere around age 8. And but I think it was always there. I mean, even when we play a game like, Settlers of Catan, I kind of make it into a role-playing game by saying, well, where are you from, and what's the name of your family, and if we'd even have time, let's draw our family signets, like what's on the front of your boat, or on your cabin, what does it look like? I'm always trying to inject narrative into any game.
And that additional detail that just gives it more flavor, more depth, and more meaning is really it's really helpful, especially for young players, because it takes them out of that video game mindset. I feel that, oh, this is superficial. I'm just running and shooting, and if my character dies, then I get another one. It actually gives them some like meaning, whether you're playing board games or role-playing games. That's fantastic. My children are now, they're 14, 12, and 11. And
Okay.
we started at a very, very young age. And I wouldn't say they weren't full blown RPG sessions. They were like shorter in duration, a little more simplistic, and the scenarios were straightforward, but very, very rarely did they attack the situation the way I expected them to. So as you
Yeah.
were raising your sons around the game, do you remember any game session where they did something that just surprised you?
I mean, they surprise me all the time. And at this point, because being a teacher is just all the most incredible things that students bring you. And as I always say, the most incredible thing that anybody can bring you as a teacher is a question, like a real, authentic, genuine question. For my things that are always funny, is like what they name themselves. Those are always funny. The things that they choose, or how adamant they might decide to be, or how they might go one direction. I think that's probably the biggest one, is just the kind of independence of my younger son, where he'll be like, I don't care what everybody else is doing, I'm going this way, or I'm going back to get my horse from those horse thieves. Or there's one particular time where there was some guys who stole some horses and got away, and the rest of the party was pretty messed up. And he said, I'm going to get my horse back. I do not care. And he turned the whole party around, and it turned out that it was a whole bunch of gnolls and goblins and just some terrible group of guys in the forest with a massive fort. Imagine what it would be like if Robin Hood was evil and had a massive fort in the forest. And it was like that, with gnolls and goblins and hobgoblins and whatever. And he was like, I'm going to get that horse back. And the whole party just decided, okay. And they decided to assault this fort. Actually, I think there's a video of it where they're all sitting around trying to figure out how to do the fort. Yeah, it is up on YouTube, where they have this, it's written on the side of the fort, die goody goodies, but it says D goody goodies. And, anyway, yeah, what surprised me was that he swung the entire campaign back to take out these horse thieves. Anyway, yeah, that's one anecdote. Anyway.
So you guys, you had a plot, you had a mission, you had an adventure hook, and your youngest is like, no, my horse is important. I'm not letting these guys just beat us up and take my horse, and convinces the entire table to put the quest on the back burner and go assault this stronghold of subhuman bandits. So Zach, you're also a teacher. What grades do you teach? Is that kind of how it works? Or are you like a traditional teacher in like a elementary or middle school setting?
No, well, I'm a traditional teacher, but my main focus is high school academic English, life skills, philosophy, writing. I'm very interested. My main thrust or purpose in education is making sure kids who become adults know how to write.
A very important skill that seems to be lacking. A lot of being able to take standardized tests, but the ability to actually write creatively or functionally is something lacking. So that's really incredible that's your how you started to incorporate RPGs into your classroom setting.
So I was in Canada working at the English Montreal School Board, and our family. So I moved in 2000 to Canada. Anyway, I went up there. I have been teaching, and I was in charge of academic English for what they call secondary 1 through 5, which means pretty much like 7th to 11th grade. The strangest thing happened where the teacher, the administration, they asked us to gamify our classrooms. And I knew in my heart of hearts that just made no sense, especially for high school. I thought for like younger kids, it could be okay, but for older kids, it's going to be a joke. I mean, you're just basically trying to, sugarcoat the curriculum and make it look fun. And to make a long story short, of course, my high school kids just saw right through it and was like, what is this? And then I said, well, yeah, what is this? And then we had this big conversation, but it led to this conversation about life being a game. And it led to this conversation about like, how can you look at life as a game? And I started thinking about skill connoisseurship, like, what is it like to put together a character? And so for me, I started to gamify in a different way. I started using actually role-playing games, the robustness of the role-playing games to give those kids a sense of like, if you created a character, what around them would help them understand what society is like and what they can do, and what would a mentor do, and what would a mentor teach you, and and then applying it to their own lives. Like, you're a character, what do you want to do, and who's going to help you get there, and how are you going to figure that out, and what skills do you need, and what are your goals, and what are the obstacles in front of you. So it became kind of I started looking at it as a game, and I had them making themselves as characters, and it all started with that. So we didn't actually, in a strange way, we didn't actually play, except for we just kind of expanded on what it would be like to build your own character yourself in a way where you have some outlook. So my focus there is like, what is the narrative of your life? What is the movie that is your life? Who are the supporting characters? Who are the main characters? Who's the background? Or who are some of the people who are the background that you can bring forward? Who are some of the main characters who are your allies versus who are some of the main characters who are maybe your enemies and are not helping you? And how do you take steps to really shape your life and shape your future?
That is amazing. And what I think is really incredible there is you're mixing not only role-playing games and character creation and things like that, but also on top of that writing skill in there of the story. Like you were talking about the antagonist and the protagonist in your story, and the minor characters versus the main character, which was each of the individual kids. So at this school in Canada, administration comes up with this great idea. It falls flat on the teenagers. So while your peers at the school are trying to make Candyland and Monopoly into their classroom, you see an opportunity for tabletop role-playing games and the lessons that they can impart on anybody. Am I right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I did watch the other teachers struggling. And I think that's kind of where now I've kind of realized what I am and what so many other teachers are. Well, not so many, but let's say there are a lot of them, but a few in each school, what I call teacher gamers versus non-teacher, like teachers who are non-gamers. And when teachers who are non-gamers try to put in, game elements, they're just, as you say, trying to sort of, take a game and put it in there, or take an. But for that, I also did a wellness mindfulness program, and that's where I really started to dig into creating characters, using creative writing to make a character build. And I started outlining and writing what would be a curriculum using role-playing games, and that would be any role-playing game. And I grew up playing all sorts of games, everything from Twilight 2000, Car Wars, Phoenix Command, Star Wars, Traveler. The list is so long. I'm trying to remember all of them. Toon. I played all sorts of different games, and some games were more, character heavy, and other ones were just more strategic heavy, or just weapons heavy. And that's another thing too, is to be careful about what the opportunities are in schools. Like if you take a game like Phoenix Command, the main purpose, or even Car Wars or Auto Duel or Mech Warrior, it's just about pitting one thing against another, whether it's a human, a car, or a machine. It's just battles. But what's nice about actual role-playing games is that the solutions can be peaceful. The solutions can be creative. It's not about fighting. And I think fighting is part of it. I think combat is an important thing. And it's also really important for kids to realize how quickly you can get hurt, and especially if you're in the wilderness, how quickly you can die without help. So I think that those things are important to actually go through too. But what I like about role-playing games is it gives you that opportunity to really explore creative solutions that are not always
And a friend of mine recently pointed out to me, he said, one of the things I like about, and he said, one of the things I like most is that as the game master, you kind of control the theme, or almost like the rating of the game, right? So I can run a dark murder mystery game for adults, and maybe I'd add a little more detail, a little more darkness, a little more gore, right? And I can run the exact same game for a group of young teens or tweens, and with really just adjusting some of the adjectives that we use or how much detail we go into, we can change it from a to use movie ratings, a rating R movie to a PG-13 movie, and he was saying that that's really good. And I said, well, the thing about that is that the game master has to be conscientious of the players at his table and their not just their expectations, but maybe their level of being able to handle certain things, like how graphic are we going to talk about the combat when the barbarian is hacking down goblins, right? So
yes, and you can go a step further. I mean, one of the main thematics are really important, as you were saying, and kind of guiding the narrative, especially as a teacher gamer, is an opportunity to really go through things that are important to your community. And I wanted to say, morals tend to be local. So what one community is looking at and what another one is looking at are entirely different. We have some global, thematics that we're all facing. And so for a global one, for example, is pollution. And so the idea of ecophobia, where if you introduce extinction to animals to kids at too young of an age, well, they start to get afraid of the subject, and they they could actually get really horrified by it. And of course, why wouldn't they? So you have to kind of figure out, at what age are you going to introduce things, and at what age, at the beginning when kids are in primary school, the whole thing is to get them into how lovely an orangutan is, but you don't start telling them that they're actually being mistreated or that they're shrinking in numbers until they're, the kid is probably more into that 11, 12, 13 years old. And it's like, yeah, these are really beautiful. And, we need to figure out how to preserve them. And how are people doing that? And then it's not until you get up into the high school level where you say, okay, guys, we really have to look at actively what we're going to do to help. So thematically, what I'm so interested in is how do you introduce things at the right level, and then how do you put those into an adventure? So you could have the old trope of the kidnapped princess, but you could also switch it to certain animals are being used for let's say magic reagents or ingredients, and maybe how can the adventure be around finding an alternative to that ingredient and getting people off some kind of superstition about, grinding down a horn of a bird because that, powder can be used to set off a spell versus, getting that ingredient from some other source, and then how do you change the whole community's understanding about that, right? Or the same thing, I do gold mining in the river. It's so funny. I just listened to a program this morning about Ghana. And it's also it's true in Indonesia as well, is that there's all this mercury and cyanide in the rivers because there's all these small gold mining operations that that use those really powerful poisons to amalgamate and separate gold from in gold panning. So I put that right into my adventures, and one of the, so just to bridge that is that when I have characters, when I have kids make characters, I say, what is some strange thing happening in your village or the place that you come from, and that your mentor has sent you, or your village has sent you, or you personally have come down from wherever you're from to solve? There's got to be some kind of environmental problem, and it can be fantastic. Like there's black bubbles that keep bubbling up in the middle of the village, from under the ground, or it can be, hail comes down every full moon, or it doesn't really matter what it is, but they have to come up with something that they're trying to investigate. So I give them already that, like, give me something that I can co-write into my narrative that you're trying to solve. And so anyway, that's back to your comment about thematic. I think thematic is so important to jump on and work with in schools with kids.
I want to talk about teacher game. And one of the things that I really enjoyed was the fact that it said 36 skills developed through role playing. And that's kind of a thing that we talk about on the show a lot, is what do kids get out of it? What have we gotten out of role playing games? How has it helped us as adults? How do we hope that it'll help our children moving forward into
or anything, that ability to actually express yourself. If you look around that entire thing, when I mean around, like what supports good writing, you find that there's so many things that can help you develop good writing. And it does start with the self, and that's what I was saying before, is like building your character. What do you want to do in your life? What motivates you? What are your obstacles? What are things that can help you achieve your goals? Those are a bunch of things that you can write about. But then when you start thinking about what are goals, so now you're talking about, what is defining your goals, and what is taking responsibility, and what is looking at your purpose and your authentic purpose, not just the purpose, what your mom or your dad wants you to do, or what your friends think you should do, but what do you want to do? Or what do you feel inside? And so that has to do with empowerment and self-validation. And so you start to think about, like, okay, that's awareness, that's self-awareness. And then there's like solutionary awareness, right? And contingent thinking and planning and being resourceful. And then, when you do step up and you ask somebody to mentor you, what's it like to ask, or to be available to mentor? So for me, it's about your story. It's about giving that over to the students and getting them to understand the power that
100%. Being able to do these scenarios around the table in a safe environment, with with low to no real life risk, right? Is an appeal, because not only does it allow teens and tweens and even adult gamers to go, okay, I go and I try to negotiate with the rowdy neighbor, and they get to kind of see how it might work and how it might not, and what approach might be better than another. And then suddenly they find themselves in that real world scenario, and they've already used the cognitive thought process of, okay, how do I approach this conflict to come to that conclusion that's going to be beneficial to me, and use that diplomacy that you're talking about. And those are skills that are very, very much so absolutely those life lessons that we're talking about, that we're hoping that our gamers get, those would be amazing to have in a classroom. Can the Teacher Gamer Handbook be helpful to other types of teachers who have other topics or other subjects, or even to parents and homeschooling teachers?
Absolutely. So the Teacher Gamer Handbook is something that has its target with its lesson plans to the teacher gamer, or a person who is already a teacher and already a gamer, but it goes right out to homeschool teachers. It goes right out to wilderness trainers. It goes right out to counselors and mindfulness coaches, anybody who's working on life skills. Everybody was struck by these 36 different skills as being something that we all need to, make sure that we refine and having. These things are all completely interrelated. This is what we need. I didn't really set out for it for any other purpose, but then when you do look at the list, you go, wow, this really is going to have an effect on anyone. One of the big things that's important to me is more bonding time with parents. As kids get older, as they get sucked into computers and screen time and phones and smart devices, they spend less time in consideration of how important family time is. And I think that this Teacher Gamer Handbook is something that also inspires more interaction and bonding time with families, because when kids come home, they are rapid firing all the stuff that happened to them. And the parents, would call up and go, what is my kid doing? Because he's rattling off that he's on the edge of a cliff, hanging there, and his friends, are hanging on a rope, and they're going to die. And he's freaking out, but he's super excited. And he goes on and on and on. And, it's incredible to see how the other thing too is that, of course, there's a bunch of disbelieving parents that say, yeah, my kid, you can't get his attention or her attention for more than 15 minutes. It's like, bring them, and the workshops I do are 4 hours actually. You can do it in 2 hours. You can do it, I think 1 hour is really short, but you have to do whatever you can do. But an after school activity of 2 hours is sometimes all a school can do before they figure out how to integrate it into the curriculum. Just the relationship that you have playing with students, when you go back to your regular classroom, when you go back to your regular subject, the relationship is different now. There's a different kind of trust level. And the most important thing is that what I want, and I think what all teachers want, is they want the trust of their students. They want that teacher-student relationship. And the thing that a teacher wants more than anything is, like I said, they want the question, they want the golden question, they want the authentic question from their student, but they also just want their students to tell them what they need. They want to know what they need help with. And I think that helps. Role-playing games in schools helps break down the barrier that allows a student.
Every teacher that I know, and I have lots of friends who teach at different levels or grades of school in public and private settings, they will tell you, I just want them to think about it critically and think about how it can be applied to them. Because I think once you make students go, hey, this information can benefit me and can help me with my personal goals, there's that I want this, I want more of this. And it's not so much chasing them to do the work as they are chasing to absorb more and more of the knowledge and the skills and things like that. Tabletop role-playing games can expand into art, into terrain building, to miniature paint. Students or players writing their own backstories for their own personal character, journaling their adventures at the table. And so when people hear tabletop role-playing game, they think that the kids are just sitting around with pencils and paper and polyhedron dice. I don't think they realize all the artistic expression and mediums that can come just from tabletop role-playing games.
Yeah, and I would definitely advocate for, in your community, to source, especially artisans. Like, for example, have the idea of just designing your own adventure bag. Most kids are going to finish high school and even middle school, and they like to have a backpack in the summer, or they want to have a gap year, or they're going to go off into their lives. And what's it like to design your own bag and then work with anybody who works in clothing or a leather maker and actually have that person come into the school, design the bags with them, go to their workshop, make the bags on their own. And the other thing is, when you do something like that, and it could be bags, it could be a hat, it could be a jacket, whatever it is, but clothing is such an important thing to understand or learn about. And all, as you say, all the math, all the measurement, all the design, all the things of looking at what people do, but also making something for somebody else. So like what I would suggest is that when a student makes a bag for themselves, they also meet somebody who they want to make a bag for, and they take all the measurements and all the details of what that person wants, and they design. And when kids sit there and they work with a professional, a skills person, a person who has artistic skill, they really, the students watch that person, and that person is listening in a way that's so powerful and important, and that to have the students feel listened to and understand what that is, and where the person's asking deeper and deeper questions to understand what the student's trying to say.
And that's beautiful to be able to facilitate those kind of meetings, people with practical life skills and young people. That is incredible. What is your advice for those folks listening to help usher in these kind of programs into their communities?
The most powerful advocate is actually the students themselves. When students ask for things, parents and administrators have a real tendency to support them. And then what I did, this was the key thing, is that I went around to the kids individually while the halls of the school, and I would take one of them aside and say, hey, I might have this chance to teach Dungeons and Dragons. Would that even be something remotely that you want to do? And it's like, yeah, I would do that. It's like, well, it's probably not going to happen, but maybe. And if it does, I'm glad to know that you want to do it. And so I kept it kind of like a secret. The other thing too is I kept it really on the down low, like, wow, this might happen. I think the mystery behind it was also a very interesting connection that I made with the student. A little bit like, well, maybe we're going to get this. It's possible. I think that that feeling that it was going to be something special, especially for those kids, especially for kids who are, let's say, struggling to connect with the curriculum, and then all of a sudden you give them an option to do something a little bit different, even seems a little bit like, I mean, could that actually be taught in school? I'm going to be playing Dungeons and Dragons. That's going to be, it really paid off to take the steps it took to confirm it with the administration, to lay out what the class was going to look like, then to talk to the kids about it and say it might happen maybe, and to really kind of build up a kind of suspense around it was very powerful for me.
That is fantastic advice. Instead of a bulletin board post, a poster saying, hey, all you kids come join the new D&D club at the school after hours or whatever, really that personal invite. Because really, as gamers, that personal invite means a lot to us. So Zach, tell us when this is going to happen. Tell us a little bit about it. If I've never done an Indiegogo campaign, how do I get in on it?
So just to say, Indiegogo is a crowdfunding source. I'm looking to crowdfund the publication of it. I've spent the last 8 years putting it together. In fact, it was going to be a gigantic book, and I've broken it up into a few different books, which makes a lot more sense. The Teacher Gamer Handbook, the basic one, what's so important about it is it's kind of all of my story, putting it together, the philosophy behind it, the pedagogical philosophy behind it, the lesson plans, and how to deliver the class and classes. The main thing about the Teacher Gamer Handbook is that it inspires you to run through a 12-phase character creation. So that's something that's particular to the book, which that takes about 10 hours. You could make it take 3 hours or 4 hours, I guess, but I like to take my time with it. And that's another thing I would say about introducing role-playing games in schools is spend the time to build characters. There are going to be players who know about it and they're going to be like, let's get to playing. But The real key thing is go, hey guys, we have this in school. This is actually maybe in your clubs and your after school activities, you might have to get along and get on with playing sooner. But if you have it in an actual class, if you have it in an English class or in a writing class, I mean, take those 10 hours and build amazing characters. And then when they go to play, the connection to the character and what the import export of the place that they're from is all worked out, and who they are and what they're doing and what their demeanor is and who their allies are and who are their enemies and what's their big secret. All those things get developed. The Teacher Gamer Handbook leads you through all those things, and also it gives you, I lay out all the different anecdotes and things that happened to me through the years of running these campaigns, and the things that the kids said and the things that people brought up and the things that people tried and the risks that they took, and all those things can be found in this book.
So Zach, I want to thank you again for being on the show today. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Thank you for your contribution to the role-playing game community, because it's because of teachers like you, parents like you, that there's going to be generations of well-rounded adults with usable, functioning life skills that all started with rolling some dice and fighting dragons in dungeons.
Thanks so much for having me, Nick. It's been great to talk.